the crown prince fell in love with the mute girl who saved him and insisted on breaking off our engagement. I kindly advised him. The mute girl is alone and without support, why not take her as a concubine first? Feeling humiliated, the mute girl took her own life in shame and anger. 10 years later, the first thing the crown prince did after securing the throne was to depose me as the Empress and annihilate my entire family. This is what you owe Gail. When I woke up again, it was my 16th birthday banquet. The Emperor asked me what I wished for. I only wish for His Highness the Crown Prince and Miss Brooks a long and happy life together. I respectfully bowed, Your Majesty, please grant them marriage. Ding! RoyalStory reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. I died on a snowy day. I could have held on until spring, but Arthur Ellis couldn't wait. The dagger pierced my chest inch by inch, and blood flowed all over the bed. He still wasn't satisfied. He twisted the handle, stirring my flesh and blood with the cold dagger. I was in so much pain I could hardly breathe, but I still asked unwillingly, why? I didn't understand. We had known each other since childhood, growing up together. For over 10 years, my father and brothers were loyal and patriotic, fully supporting him. Before he consolidated royal power, they had already handed over military authority and voluntarily resigned. Yet he still found a trumped-up charge to wipe out my Donahue family. Why, Arthur? I clung to his wrist. Arthur's face was paler than the snow outside. Clearly, he was the one who struck the fatal blow, yet his expression made it seem as if I had wronged him. This is what you owe Gail. He gritted his teeth. Gail? Gail Brooks. The memory was so distant that it took me some effort to recall the name. And the delicate face behind it. I couldn't help but laugh. 10 years. So he had never forgotten her in all these 10 years. He blamed her death on me and my entire Donahue family. Arthur, you really are a fool. Before I could finish the last one word, Arthur had already pulled out the dagger. Red blood splattered, a bit falling under my tongue. Metallic and sweet. Just like the bloodbird's nest soup my mother made for me that year, her eyes red from exhaustion. Miss, is your heart hurting again? The heavy snow disappeared. The bone-chilling cold was gone. Spring was in full bloom, and people were bustling about. It was my 16th birthday banquet. So, it seemed God had opened his eyes, and in a blink, I was alive again. Not only alive, but back to when I was 16. That year, my brother won a great victory, and my father made significant contributions to flood control. That year, I had not yet married Arthur. Of course, her heart hurts. A mocking voice came from behind. Yesterday, His Highness the Crown Prince knelt all night at the Hall of Diligent Governance, asking to break off his engagement with the Donahue's family. Penny turned to confront them, but I stopped her. He wasn't just about breaking off our engagement. That year, Arthur encountered danger while suppressing bandits, fell off a cliff, and was saved by an orphaned girl. The orphaned girl was beautiful and gentle. To save him, she tasted every herb and ruined her health. She even lost her voice, as sweet as a yellow oriole. Arthur was deeply moved and brought her back to the palace. Counting yesterday, he had knelt for 3 days and nights at the Hall of Diligent Governance. He wanted to marry her as the crown princess. Miss, don't listen to the gossip outside. You and His Highness have been close since childhood. His Highness cares for you. I looked at Penny and shook my head. Penny stopped mid-sentence. Of course, I knew what she was going to say. 3 days ago, I woke up in the minister's residence. 3 days was enough to sort out my past and present lives. Miss, Penny suddenly brightened up and whispered. His Highness the Crown Prince is coming. I looked up to see Arthur Ellis in his Crown Prince's attire, walking towards me, surrounded by people. The murmurs around us immediately ceased. Arthur and I had grown up together. Our engagement was set before we were born. From a young age, he was the first to defend me if anyone spoke ill of me. When he made mistakes and was punished, I was the first to plead for him. Before this, no one doubted that I was Arthur's true love. I was the only candidate for the crown princess. But today, on my 16th birthday, he brought another woman. Gail Brooks, thin and pale, clung to his side like a frightened bird. Arthur had knelt all night, showing no fatigue. Instead, he had a smile on his lips, whispering something intimate in her ear. She looked at me, her expression instantly turning panicked and helpless. She took a few steps forward and knelt before me with a thud. Just like in my past life. Even the tear hanging on her eyelash was exactly the same. In my past life, I was fooled by her helpless appearance and sincerely planned for her and Arthur. I was born into the Donahue family. And my future husband was the crown prince. I never expected one life, one person. Her appearance made my heart sour, but it didn't make me lose my composure. When Arthur wanted to break off the engagement, I didn't cry or make a fuss. I sincerely advised him out of our long friendship. Miss Brooks has no one to rely on in the capital and in poor health. Even though she saved you. I'm afraid, even if you kneel until your knees break, His Majesty will not grant her the position of the crown princess. Instead, it will only bring disaster upon her. Your Highness, why not take a step back and take her as a concubine first, and in the future? I spoke vaguely. In the future, won't it be up to you to decide? Just a few words to save her from disaster, but it brought endless trouble to me. Bang! 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 In my past life, when Gail knelt, I hurriedly went to help her up. This time, I just watched coldly as she kowtowed without hesitation. The sound echoed loudly. Penny tugged at my sleeve. There were many guests today, all watching us. I brushed her hand away. Why rush? Gail! Arthur's face was already darkening. In just a moment, Gail's forehead was already bleeding. Paired with her tearful eyes, she looked pitiful. She glanced at Arthur, then at me, bit her lip, and continued kowtowing. I leisurely picked up my tea. I was suddenly curious to see how far she would go. Yes. Gail was pretending. Her mute was an act, her pitiful demeanor was an act. And even her suicide out of shame in my past life was an act. In a quiet corner of Longstreet, I heard her Oriole-like voice with my own ears. She was sobbing and begging a masked person. Master, I'm just an orphan girl. If I don't use some bitter tricks, how will His Highness ever remember me? Master, please give me another fake death medicine. Master, Gail truly loves His Highness. I know my status, even being a concubine is reaching too high. But His Highness promised me the position of the crown princess. I must make some fuss about it to make him feel guilty. Master, please help Gail. As long as I fake my death once, His Highness will remember his guilt towards me for life. What a great actress. She fooled Arthur, fooled me. Fooled all the nobles in the capital. I once asked Arthur why he was so devoted to Gail. I was born a crown prince. Everyone flatters and fawns over me. They respect and love me because of my status as the crown prince. Even you, Minna, would you still love me if I weren't the crown prince? This question stumped me at the time. If he weren't the crown prince, we wouldn't have had an engagement or grown up together. How could there be love? Only Gail, not knowing my identity, was willing to risk her life for me. Minna, how could I resist such pure love? I was almost convinced by him. As a noble lady, I always acted with caution. I had to consider my parents, my family. I wouldn't easily risk my life for anyone. We all overlooked another possibility. Even if Arthur fell off a cliff, his clothes alone would reveal his noble status. Whether he was a nobleman, a prince, or a crown prince, Gail had decided from the start. She wanted to climb up to him. Enough! Arthur shouted. The surroundings fell silent. Gail trembled all over, looked up timidly, and glanced at me. The meaning was clear. She ruined my engagement, made me a laughingstock, and felt guilty. If I didn't speak, she wouldn't stop. Fine. Then continue. I raised my eyebrows and sipped my tea. Gail gritted her teeth and bowed to continue kowtowing. Arthur suddenly stepped forward and slapped the teacup out of my hand. Minna Donahue, don't go too far. Minna Donahue, is this the demeanor of the eldest daughter of the Donahue family? Arthur glared at me, startling the servants around us to their knees. He turned to lift Gail, gently touching her forehead. Minna Donahue, apologize. If you apologize now, I'll pretend nothing happened. I almost laughed out loud. I was too naive back then. After catching Gail, I wrote to Arthur that night, telling him what I had seen and heard. Asking him to be wary of Gail. The next day, Gail died. She really died. Rumor had it she didn't want to be a concubine and committed suicide out of shame. Arthur wrote back to me. Thanks to Minna's reminder, those who deceive me deserve to die. After that, the matter was settled. For so many years, I thought he had killed Gail, using her deception as a pretext. After all, he always hated being deceived. Until my deathbed. It turned out that the deceiver he spoke of was me. Minna, are you mute? Gail did nothing wrong. It was I who wanted to break the engagement. Apologize to her, and I won't hold her injury against you. I looked at Arthur and couldn't help but smirk. I was blind. I always thought he was wise and astute. Penny, is His Majesty in the front hall? I turned to my maid. Penny nodded blankly. I lifted my skirt and walked forward. Arthur followed closely behind. What are you going to do? The Emperor came incognito and didn't summon any women. Of course, I knew. My birthday banquet wouldn't warrant the Emperor's presence. But why was His Majesty here? Because my two brothers were at the frontier, reporting victories. Because my father had just controlled the floods, earning widespread praise. Because the Donahue family, with a century of loyalty, had many key officials in the court. And the Crown Prince had knelt for 3 days and nights, asking to break off our engagement. The Emperor feared disheartening my father and brothers. Even as the eunuch announced my arrival, Arthur was still following me. Minna, don't use your birthday to ask my father for something that doesn't belong to you. I've already promised Gail the position of the Crown Princess and won't go back on my word. If you insist on marrying me, you can only be a concubine. I glanced back at Arthur. As he said, he was born a crown prince. His life has been too smooth. He had never realized what the position of crown princess meant to him. Perhaps my glance was too cold, and Arthur was momentarily stunned. Just then, the Emperor spoke from his seat. Minna, why are you in such a hurry to see me? Do you have something important? The hall was full of guests. I knelt. Your Majesty, today is my birthday. May I boldly ask for a wish? The Crown Prince and Miss Brooks have a deep bond. I am envious, fearing to ruin their promise of eternal love. Your Majesty, please annul my engagement with the Crown Prince. And grant them marriage. I knelt devoutly. The room fell silent, and you could hear a pin drop. By evening, the news had spread throughout the capital. The marriage between the Crown Prince and the Donahue family was likely to be called off. The Crown Prince's desire to marry his savior had already caused a stir. Today, the eldest daughter of the exemplary Donahue family, on her birthday, in front of all the officials, asked the Emperor to annul the engagement. It was said that the Crown Prince's expression was quite spectacular. The Emperor even scolded him as a rebellious son, smashing a teacup at him. Ridiculous! I knelt on the ground and didn't escape a teacup either. Who allowed you to be so bold and reckless? My father's beard was trembling with anger. Annul the engagement, huh? Marriage is arranged by parents and matchmakers. Is it your place to intervene? You even dared to speak out in front of the Emperor. I kept my back straight and didn't blink. The late Emperor granted this marriage. Do you think you can annul it just like that? You will go to the palace and apologize, saying it was a moment of impulse and loose talk. I'm not going. I said firmly. Not going? What do you plan to do then? Annul the engagement. Annul the engagement, then do you think anyone in this capital would dare to marry you after this? I pursed my lips, not necessarily. You. My father pointed at me. I think you're possessed. He stormed off. I was indeed possessed. If not for my past experiences, I would never do what I'm doing now. I was trained to follow rules and decorum since childhood. I wouldn't have appeared in front of so many male guests, let alone ask for an annulment. But following rules and decorum didn't yield good results. The Donahue family, with a century of loyalty, knew when to advance and when to retreat. When the court needed us, we stepped forward. When the court was stable, we retreated. Absolute loyalty earned the absolute trust of successive monarchs. My father, my brothers, and uncles all adhered to this principle. So in my past life, when Arthur showed any indication, they handed over power and resigned without hesitation. Only to be caught off guard by Arthur. It proved that absolute loyalty to a fool was foolish. "Miss, what did the Crown Prince say?" Penny couldn't read. She was applying ointment to my knees while eagerly looking at the letter in my hand. Arthur used to write to me often, pouring out his heart. This time, there were only 4 words. "Enough is enough." I smirked and burned the letter. "Miss." Penny panicked. "Miss, if His Highness is apologizing, you just soften up." I interrupted her. "Besides the letter, did anything else come for me today?" Penny was stunned. "Yes." She handed me a piece of white jade from the dressing table, her eyes suddenly brightening. "Today is your birthday. Could this be from the Crown Prince?" My eyes also brightened. I got up and grabbed my cloak. "Miss, what's gotten into you these days? Why are you going out so late?" "Wait for me." "Penny, you stay here." I closed the door, turned around, and left. The rule-following Minna Donahue of a few days ago was long dead. The one who remained was the rebellious Minna Donahue. The man before me was lean and pale. A mole at the corner of his eye was strikingly red. He looked very different from my memory. I examined him, and he examined me. His dark eyes were indifferent, seemingly nonchalant. "Miss Donahue lives up to your reputation. Beautiful and dignified." His voice was like falling pearls. I smiled at him. "Your Highness lives up to your reputation too. Stalwart as pine and cypress." He slightly raised the corner of his lips, also smiling lightly. We exchanged pleasantries, both knowing the underlying meaning. "The fruits Miss Donahue sent the other day." He pushed the fruit plate in front of him. "They're ripe." I opened my hand, revealing the white jade. "Your Highness's fine jade." I received it. I picked up a fruit from the plate. He reached for the jade. I closed my hand. His hand paused, and I smiled at him. His name was Justin Ellis. The Emperor's eldest son, Arthur Ellis's older brother. My father was right. My engagement to Arthur was granted by the late Emperor and couldn't be easily annulled. But I knew all too well that this marriage had to be annulled. The first day I woke up in this new life, I searched my memories for this man. High status, good position, most importantly. He died young. Strictly speaking, he was the Emperor's legitimate eldest son, and the Crown Prince position should have been his. My engagement should also have been his. But his mother was weak and died shortly after giving birth to him. He was also frail, and before he was a year old, the national preceptor predicted he wouldn't live past 18. Therefore, the Crown Prince position was destined to elude him. In my past life, he lived past 18 but only survived 6 more years. Yet he clearly had ambitions. He never married or had children. When he died, his estate's wealth surpassed half of the national treasury. One can only imagine what he might have achieved had he lived longer or been in good health. "Miss Donahue, what do you mean by this?" Justin's dark eyes looked at me. "I despise fools." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Before we form an alliance, let me see your abilities." Justin laughed. This time, it was a genuine smile, adding some radiance to his pale face. He slowly raised his cup and took a sip of tea. Exchanging gifts privately was a grave taboo for the old Minna Donahue. But I needed an ally. Moreover, a wise ally. The capital city remained calm. Rumors circulated for a few days but quickly fell apart. How could the engagement between the Crown Prince and the Donahue family be called off? The eldest daughter of the Donahue family was destined to be the Empress. Who would dare to marry her if the Crown Prince did not? Arthur Ellis was in high spirits. The Emperor did not show him a good face, so he took Gail Brooks on a spring hunt. While he was away from the capital, he naturally did not notice the frequent business transactions within just a month. Or even if he were in the capital, he would not care. The Crown Prince's residence did not lack silver. Even if it did, the Donahue family would provide. He also did not notice the silent personnel changes within the Crown Prince's residence. After all, it was just some maids and matrons, insignificant. Is that all? The correspondence between Arthur and me turned into correspondence between Justin and me. But the sickly first prince did not have much to say. He did not reply to this letter. Within 2 days, a new drama unfolded in the capital. A noble young man was saved by an orphan girl, and they secretly pledged their lives to each other. But the orphan girl was of common birth. And the noble young man was from a prestigious family, so they could not accept her as the headmistress. Of course, in the end, they broke the chains of tradition and stayed together in love. At the end of the play, the noble young man passionately declared, "So what if she is a commoner? Why can't a commoner be the headmistress? Repaying kindness is the act of a gentleman. If one cannot be a gentleman, how can one be the head of a family?" The plot of the play was too familiar, and as it became popular, public opinion quickly fermented. Why can't a commoner be the mother of the nation? If the Crown Prince couldn't even repay kindness, how could he be the ruler of the nation? The Crown Prince wanting to marry a mute girl was the act of a gentleman. The Crown Prince should marry the mute girl. Almost at the same time, a spectacle appeared in the forest where the Crown Prince was hunting in spring. Hundreds of birds circled and chirped around the horse where the mute girl sat. 100 birds facing the phoenix. So when the Crown Prince returned to the capital, the people welcomed him along the way. He held the mute girl in front of him, full of pride. It was quite clever, using public sentiment to force the emperor to compromise. And it killed 3 birds with 1 stone. It cut off Arthur's future, blocked my father's path, and created a rift between Arthur and the emperor. What 100 birds facing the phoenix, just a trick to fool the public. The emperor would not suspect the secluded Justin, but would think that all this was Arthur's doing. As for Arthur, in his excitement, he probably thought it was God helping him. What do you think? Not bad. Is that all? I smiled. I sent out that piece of white jade. A gift for a gift, a jade for a melon. Not out of obligation, but for eternal goodwill. I added a note, "Your Highness, why not press your advantage? Miss Donahue, have you thought it through?" Of course. Since we had formed an alliance, the first move in my rebirth could not afford the slightest hesitation. Penny cursed for 3 whole days about Arthur and Gail flaunting their relationship. But shameless was the worst thing she could say. This time, there were no rumors in the capital. Everyone was certain that the marriage between the eldest daughter of the Donahue family and the Crown Prince would definitely be called off. They were just waiting to see me make a fool of myself. My engagement was indeed called off. But no one got to see me make a fool of myself. It was said that the palace was bustling that day. Arthur brought several scholars who supported the mute girl as his consort, witnesses of the 100 birds facing the phoenix. And a few accomplished monks. A large group of people knelt at the gate of the Hall of Diligent Governance. My father received the news immediately and rushed to the palace with several uncles and students. The Donahue family had never been so humiliated in 100 years. "Your Majesty, since the Crown Prince has made up his mind, please grant his wish. We have no complaints." Another group knelt. All this for a mute girl, causing such an embarrassing scene. The emperor was angry and annoyed. But at this point, he had no other choice but to agree. But as the rumors in the city said, who would dare to marry a girl who had been engaged to the Crown Prince for over 10 years and from Donahue family held half the court's power? Ruining Minna Donahue's life like this, how would the emperor face his loyal ministers in the future? Would the 100-year harmony between the Donahue family and the royal family be broken? In this stalemate, an unexpected person appeared. Actually, I had specially sent a note to Justin Ellis that day. Dress nicely. Don't mind my father's serious face, he judges people by their appearance. So in the rumors, when that person appeared, he was charming and elegant, like a celestial being descending from the heavens. When he knelt, everyone realized. It was the sickly first prince who had been almost forgotten. And his first words were even more shocking. "Father, I asked to marry Minna Donahue." One sentence broke the deadlock. The emperor suddenly remembered he had another son, though frail, who had lived past the age of 18 as predicted by the national preceptor. My father, not having seen him for years, was surprised at how refined the first prince had become, much more pleasing than the bewitched crown prince. In a glance exchanged between the emperor and his minister, they understood each other. Only the crown prince, it was said, looked shocked and almost stood up. Before he could speak, the emperor issued an imperial decree. The engagement between Minna Donahue and the crown prince was annulled, and she was betrothed to the first prince. The crown prince was also betrothed to the mute girl, Gail Brooks, with the wedding date to be set. And so, the matter ended. When I received the imperial decree, I felt a rare sense of joy. The first move had gone so smoothly, beyond my expectations. It showed how important it was to choose the right ally. Just after receiving the decree, Arthur came. Finally able to marry his beloved, he didn't go to be with Gail Brooks but came to vent his anger on me. I ordered no entry for the crown prince and dogs. Unfortunately, only Penny in my courtyard dared to shout this at him. Arthur was furious outside the courtyard. Minna Donahue, are you mad? I came to remind you out of kindness, Justin Ellis is a useless person. If you know what's good for you, you'd better find a way to call off the engagement. Otherwise, you'll be the one crying in the future. I was in a good mood and didn't even bother to raise an eyebrow at him. I just slowly opened the letter in my hand. When to make the next move? My ally was indeed more ambitious than the one outside. I picked up my pen, no rush. Enjoy the show. Before Arthur killed me, he actually said a lot. But it hurt so much then that I couldn't remember much. What I remembered most was, if it weren't for you, if it weren't for your Donahue family, Gail and I could have been together forever. In this life without me or the Donahue family, I want to see how he and Gail would be together forever. In the side room, the fragrance of tea lingered. The plague has broken out in the south, and the crown prince volunteering to relieve the disaster is a good thing, but is it appropriate to bring a female companion? What's inappropriate? The mute girl, the crown princess, though not yet married, is blessed by God. I heard she knows medicine, she might benefit the people. The tea house was always full of people discussing current affairs. Is this the good show you mentioned? The crown prince went south to relieve the disaster, bringing along the mute girl who had not yet married. For a while, the city was abuzz with discussion. I raised an eyebrow and drank my tea. Of course, it was more than that. You are really smart and good, fortunately, some are blind. Justin suddenly laughed. I looked up. He was indeed quite handsome, especially when he smiled, the small mole at the corner of his eye added to his charm. For months, we often drank tea together, speaking in a manner that was both respectful and understanding, getting along harmoniously. But my gaze dropped, he was indeed quite thin. Seeing me looking at him, Justin glanced at my teacup and leaned over to pour me some tea. A prince, engaged in commerce, yet carrying the scent of ink. Why are you so silent today? He glanced at me while pouring tea. It wasn't that I was silent. I was thinking about Arthur's words, Justin Ellis is a useless person. Hey, I directly grabbed his collar, can you have children? Justin's eyelids twitched. He slowly put down the teapot. He looked up, his eyes calm, but the mole at the corner of his eye was a deep red. He pinched my chin. You want to try? I really wanted to try. If Justin couldn't have children, wouldn't my entire plan be wasted? But no matter how unconventional, I couldn't try it in a tea house. A month later, the show I had invited Justin to watch finally premiered. The crown prince went south to fight the plague, bringing along the mute girl he loved dearly. Unexpectedly, the mute girl contracted the plague and did not recover. In his anxiety, the crown prince sent her back to the capital. It would have been fine if the mute girl returned to the capital, but no one expected the crown prince to return as well. The crown prince was drugged and brought back by the mute girl. The crown prince already showed symptoms. I was about to die, how could I leave him there to die? In my previous life, Gail tearfully wrote her statement on paper. A girl who knew a few words but hadn't read many books. Everyone was speechless. A defeated general must hold the flag and not fall. The crown prince volunteered to go to the plague area. Not only did he send the infected mute girl back to the capital, but he also abandoned everyone and fled. Moreover, the crown prince did not have the plague, just a common cold. Last time, this matter was suppressed by my father. The officials who went to the plague area were all my father's students. Before Arthur entered the city, my father received the news. He intercepted them overnight and sent them back, so the matter didn't leak out. But in this life, my father no longer wanted to help him. Gail brought Arthur into the city, and the capital exploded. All kinds of criticisms of the crown prince spread throughout the public. The emperor was furious, scolding the crown prince for his unfit conduct and lack of virtue. Public opinion can be swayed with money. But such matters cannot use official funds. The crown prince, realizing this too late, found that within 6 months, his private assets were either dead or wasted. His private treasury was empty. He couldn't bring himself to ask for money. He had to let public opinion continue to ferment. Get ready for the second move. I sent a note to Justin. I wanted to expose Gail's act of pretending to be mute. Arthur always believed that Gail's love for him was pure and flawless. In my previous life, when Gail brought him back to the capital, he just sighed. Gail was just too worried about me. This time, with no one to clean up after him, could he still say that? Justin had already planted some maids in the crown prince's residence. It was not difficult to make someone who could already speak. I initially planned to make a fuss about the plague, just to scare her. But before I could start plotting, someone walked into the trap. It was said that it happened one evening. The crown prince had been scolded by the people, the officials, and the emperor, feeling extremely frustrated. He hadn't visited his beloved Gail's courtyard for 5 days. The crown prince's residence had an artificial lake and a stone bridge. That evening, Gail, as delicate as her name, sat weakly on the stone railing of the bridge, crying and gesturing to the crown prince. Gail is ignorant. Gail has implicated your highness. Gail is willing to atone. Your highness, in the next life, Gail will repay your highness's deep affection. Splash! She jumped into the lake. The crown prince, deeply affectionate, naturally followed. But it was unclear if the timing was too late or the crown prince was always blind. He struggled in the water for a long time, unable to find her. To make the act real, Gail genuinely couldn't swim. After struggling for a while, she couldn't find anyone to save her. At the critical moment, survival instincts took over, and she shouted, "Help! Help! Your Highness, I am here." It was said that the crown prince's expression at the time was quite remarkable. Unfortunately, he had 3 such remarkable expressions, and I didn't see any of them. After that, the crown prince's residence was filled with scolding and crying. A few days later, they went to the Hall of Diligent Governance. The crown prince knelt and refused to get up. "Father, please retract the decree. I want to call off the engagement. My mother taught me from a young age that as a woman, especially a noble woman, love is terrifying. Love your partner only 7/10, and keep 3/10 for yourself." Arthur, as the crown prince, was he not taught this? Perhaps. Or maybe he had been spoiled from a young age. Although the Empress was a second wife, she was beautiful and favored by the emperor. The emperor had an eldest son who was always sick and a few delicate princesses. It wasn't until Arthur was 14 that another little prince was born. Arthur naturally occupied all the royal resources from birth, and naturally thought that everyone and everything should revolve around him. Whoever he wanted to marry, he must marry. Whoever he didn't want to marry, no one could force him. The emperor was so angry he almost fainted, immediately drawing the imperial sword. Causing a commotion, he wanted to marry someone, and now, on the eve of the wedding, he said he didn't. How would the people see him? How would they see the emperor's decree? Of course, he didn't really cut him, just kicked him a few times and told him to get lost. Arthur got lost to my courtyard. At that time, I had just finished trying with Justin and didn't want to move. But no one was left in the courtyard, and he knocked on the door loudly. When I opened the door, I finally saw the remarkable expression on the crown prince's face. Justin had a certain sharpness unique to princes. Seeing me about to get up, he insisted on biting my neck twice. Arthur clearly saw this. His eyes were filled with shock, surprise, and even a bit of bitterness. It took him a while to find his voice. "Minna, you and..." I straightened my clothes and tilted my head to look at him. Tired of living by the rules, I wanted to defy conventions. "So what?" Arthur suddenly got angry. "You haven't even married yet. Do you know no shame?" "Brother, that's not appropriate." I was about to speak when a voice like jade came from the inner room. "You had an affair with that mute girl without a matchmaker." "What about us?" Arthur didn't expect him to still be in my room, his face turning red and then white. "I, unlike you, today break off an engagement with one, tomorrow with another. I stay loyal to the one I choose." Arthur's face turned pale. "And, Minna is not for you to call. You should call her sister-in-law." Arthur's lips trembled, unable to speak. I thought he was going to call me sister-in-law. Boring. I closed the door. "Minna," Arthur blocked the door. "Minna, it was Gail who deceived me. She caused the rift between us. Listen to me, a few days ago, I dreamt that I was marrying you. Honey," Justin directly changed his address. "The bed is cold, I'm weak and cold. Crown Prince, why not come in and speak with the first prince?" Arthur closed his mouth. I shut the door. Arthur, who knows how much he was stimulated, fell ill after returning. There was no excitement at the Hall of Diligent Governance, nor at the Crown Prince's residence. But the preparations for my wedding with Justin kept me busy. One day, while I was sorting my dowry, an unwelcome guest arrived. Gail knelt down as soon as she saw me, crying her eyes out. "Miss Donahue, please go to the Crown Prince's residence to see him." I sidestepped, avoiding her grasp. "Miss Donahue, His Highness is seriously ill and won't wake up. Calling your name in his dreams. Please go see him, he might wake up." It was the second time in 2 lifetimes I heard Gail's voice. Not easy. I looked down at her, not wanting to respond. "Miss Donahue, you and His Highness grew up together, please go to the Crown Prince's residence." Gail started kowtowing. "It's my fault for being presumptuous. As long as Miss Donahue agrees, I am willing to be a concubine." "Miss Donahue, I beg you." I frowned, and a cold voice came from beside me. "Who's in charge here? How can any stray cat or dog enter the mansion?" Penny, after cursing the Crown Prince as a dog, became bolder. "Steward! See the guest out." Gail was thrown out and never allowed back in. It was a trivial matter, but the more I thought about her words, the more uneasy I felt. Arthur was ill, calling my name? He never had such deep feelings for me. Besides, he mentioned dreaming of marrying me. Could he be? My rebirth was odd enough, nothing was impossible. But if he remembered the past life, where would I make my third move? I had boasted to Justin that if he allied with me, in just 3 moves, he could reclaim what was rightfully his. Having died so miserably in my previous life, I would never let Arthur peacefully be the Crown Prince. Or even ascend the throne. I had someone watch the Crown Prince's residence. Arthur had woken up and seemed fine. There was no major event in the Crown Prince's residence. The entrance to the Hall of Diligent Governance was empty. Arthur no longer asked to break off the engagement but postponed his wedding with Gail. This made me even more uneasy. Arthur's nature was to never give up until he achieved his goal. Postponing the wedding, could it be because he knew that the end was near? My third move would take place on a night a month later. That night, the Emperor passed away silently in the autumn wind. Throughout history, the night of an emperor's death was the most important night. But it was an exception for Arthur. He had no competitors. In the previous life, the emperor died in his sleep and was only discovered by the servants in the morning. Arthur took over the throne calmly and smoothly. But in this life, there was Justin. And me. As long as my third move was good and precise enough, kicking Arthur out wouldn't be hard. I prepared everything according to plan. I had a heart-to-heart talk with my father. Gave Justin the defense map of the palace. Wrote letters to my 2 brothers. The Crown Prince's residence remained normal. Arthur attended court as usual, and Gail kept crying. A month passed quickly. When night fell, I handed Arthur a note. At midnight, meet by the moat. Arthur and I actually had some good memories. Before Gail appeared, Arthur would accompany me to release lanterns by the moat on every birthday. As a child, I didn't know shyness and would loudly state my wishes. Within a few days, those desired things would be delivered from the Crown Prince's residence. After growing up, I stopped saying them out loud, but Arthur could always find out my preferences from those around me. When I arrived at the moat, he was already there. With just one look, I knew my guess was correct. The gaze of a newly crowned prince and that of someone who had been an emperor for 10 years were different. "Minna, it's been years since we've been here." He looked at the dark moat. At this hour, naturally, there were no lanterns. "I remember the year you slipped down there." He pointed to a rock below the river. "You cried out in fear. It was I who pulled you up. Your Highness has a good memory." I smiled. "I don't remember." "So, as soon as you returned, you planned to stay away from me, right? What else?" I glanced at him and said, "Wait to be killed by you again?" Arthur's eyebrows twitched. His voice lowered. "Minna, I wronged you. It was the Franklin family." When I pursued the Franklin family, I found out that Gail's maid was from the Franklin family. After learning about her fake death plan, she swapped her medicine and framed the Donahue family. I trusted you, so I didn't save her in time, but she really died. I didn't want to listen. There were oddities back then, no need to think about it. But what good is knowing the truth now? What shouldn't have been done, he had already done. So what if she committed suicide out of shame because I advised you to take her as a concubine? I looked coldly at Arthur. "Arthur Ellis, whether to take her as a concubine or not was your decision. You saw that the Emperor resolutely refused, and you wavered, didn't you? But because of a well-meaning suggestion from me, you exterminated my entire family." I thought. "I don't want to hear it." The autumn wind was bleak. Arthur looked at me deeply, then suddenly laughed. "I know where the problem lies." He dragged me forward and stopped in front of a big tree. He had brought Gail as well. Her hands and feet were tied, her mouth sealed, and she was bound to the tree trunk. Gail's eyes were already red from crying. Seeing us, she whimpered, and tears fell again. "Those who deceive me shall be killed." Almost in the blink of an eye, Arthur drew the sword from his waist. A single stroke to the throat. This was his so-called true love. The person in front of me was probably not just Arthur 10 years later. When he killed me back then, his face was still pale. Today, he executed a clean stroke without changing his expression. I clenched my fists. "Does this make you feel better?" Gail's eyes were still open. I looked away. "Minna, I know I was wrong. Those years, I regretted it every day. I built." "Shut up." I didn't want to hear another word from him. Arthur's eyes darkened again. Then he smiled. "At 3/4 past the hour of the midnight, is this the time you've been waiting for?" 3/4 past the hour of the midnight was the time the imperial physician announced the emperor's true death in the previous life. "Minna, do you think without the Donahue family to help me, you can win with a useless Justin? I will let you see, tonight, who wins and who loses." Arthur dragged me onto a horse and headed straight for the imperial city. As soon as we entered the city gates, a beam of light rose in the direction of the palace. A signal flare from the crown prince's residence. It likely informed him that the emperor had passed. The horse advanced into the palace gates as if unchallenged. The imperial guards within the palace were already under Arthur's control. The palace eunuchs looked panicked and knelt upon seeing the horse. They had seen disputes before. In front of the emperor's sleeping quarters, it was packed with people. The entire Crown Prince Guard had come out. Along with the Imperial Guard, the Capital Guard, and the Donahue family army, all mixed together. Arthur pulled on the reins and people around shouted, "Your Highness." Who won and who lost was clear at a glance. Justin was held by 2 Crown Prince guards. My 2 brothers, who had rushed from afar, had their hands bound, with knives at their necks. The Donahue family army was all kneeling on the ground. Truly pitiful. Arthur dismounted and extended his hand to me. "Come, my Empress." I only looked at him. Arthur extended his hand closer, his expression so sincere. "Minna, in this life, I want you to be the happiest Empress I glanced at the densely packed crowd and looked up at the moon in the sky. The timing was perfect. I looked at Arthur, tilting my head slightly. Did he really win? Arthur frowned and looked around, a trace of surprise in his eyes. Had he noticed the Donahue family army was too few? Rebellious son. At this moment, a loud shout came from the front. Who do you think is the Emperor? Arthur looked in disbelief at the person in a nightgown who appeared at the door of the sleeping quarters. It was the Emperor. My third move hadn't actually been disrupted by Arthur's rebirth. Because I knew that people always like to measure others by themselves. Especially now that he had become such a ruthless and murderous tyrant. In his eyes, tonight, I would surely use the Donahue family's power. Occupy the palace, alter the Emperor's will, and push Justin to the throne. He wouldn't consider a second possibility. Because he was also eagerly waiting for this night, waiting to return to the day when he stood above millions. But I wouldn't let him get his way. From the beginning, my third move was never a palace coup. The Emperor was a good emperor. Diligent in governance, loving the people like his children, and holding great respect and regard for the Donahue family. Since I knew he would pass away silently tonight, why not prepare early? Arthur had only been reborn for a month and might not know. Since more than half a year ago, the Emperor's pulse was checked 3 times a day. The decoction he used was also far from before. The Emperor's health was actually much better than in the previous life. From the beginning, I just wanted the Emperor to become suspicious of Arthur. The first move was like this, and so was the second move. The third move was to create various illusions, making Arthur think we wanted to support Justin and initiate a coup. Once he took action, coupled with the Emperor's previous dissatisfaction with him, the deposing of the Crown Prince was inevitable. Of course, thanks to Gail. If not for her, I wouldn't have known that there was such a miraculous thing as fake death medicine in this world. We found her master, tested it a few times. Confirmed it was harmless to the body, and could control the duration of fake death based on the dosage. So in the original plan, the Emperor was also supposed to fake death tonight. Arthur's rebirth made me do one more thing, invite him to the moat. If he were in the palace, he might have noticed the insufficient number of the Donahue family army early on. To seize the palace, those numbers were not enough. This night's palace coup naturally had the Emperor's cooperation. The Emperor trusted my father. My father said Arthur might have rebellious thoughts, so why not test him? He agreed to the test. He didn't know the medicine would make him fake death. Didn't know it was all part of our unconventional plan. The next time I saw Arthur was 3 months later, in the dungeon. From autumn to winter, snow was falling. It was very similar to the day I died. The dungeon was extremely cold. Arthur had lost a lot of weight, his hands and feet chained, wearing thin prison clothes, leaning in the corner. He wouldn't have been so miserable. But he had been reborn, and his methods were ruthless when he gathered the Imperial Guards and the Capitol Guards. The Emperor was extremely disappointed in him, refusing to see him even on his deathbed. Despite the best imperial physicians and the best medicine, the Emperor's life was only extended by 3 months. Hearing voices, Arthur looked up, then lowered his head. Realizing that the visitor was different from usual, he looked up again. His eyes lit up. I entered the cell, and he immediately stood up, trying to grab my hand as he approached. I dodged, and his hand hung in the air. Minna, you still won't forgive me. I couldn't help but laugh out loud again. Minna, it wasn't easy for us to be reborn. This is a chance given by God for us to start over. I don't think so. I kept a 3-foot distance from him. Letting us come back might be because some people were too wronged. Arthur's eyes dimmed again. Arthur, do you know why in our 10 years of marriage, I never got pregnant? Arthur's gaze fell on my abdomen. Because from the moment I married you, my father gave me contraceptive medicine. The power of the external family was too great, not suitable for having children for now. After achieving success and retiring, it would be better to raise children. My father, my brothers, my clan, were so loyal to him. But actually, we had a child. Arthur's pupils contracted sharply. When you killed me, I was already 3 months pregnant. Then why didn't you? Why didn't I tell you, right? I walked closer to him, looking up at him. Why would I give someone like you a child? Arthur's face turned ashen inch by inch, showing a rare expression of pain. Arthur, I was really worried you wouldn't come back. I was afraid you thought you died unjustly. I drew the dagger from my hand and swiftly stabbed it into his chest. Arthur looked at me in shock, the pain on his face spreading to his eyes. I quietly watched him. This is what you owe me. The snow fell harder. It covered the palace paths. Justin was waiting for me outside. The road is slippery. He squatted down. I'll carry you. I climbed onto his back. He was actually quite thin, having just recovered from an illness. But I really didn't want to walk by myself. His back wasn't very warm, only a hint of warmth at the nape of his neck. But I still leaned on it. Probably because of our seamless cooperation these days, probably because he never asked why. I couldn't help but shed a few tears. He suddenly sighed, "You are not unloved. Is it possible that I earned all that silver just so that when you become the emperor, the treasury would be full, and the country would be stable?" I jumped off his back immediately. "Hey, you've achieved your goal, now you're playing the emotional card to make me soften and back down?" Justin touched his nose and smiled. "You caught me." The day Justin ascended the throne, he split the national seal in half. As agreed, we governed the country together, made decisions together. But I seemed to have misjudged him. He didn't seem very enthusiastic about being emperor. First, he humbly stated that he lacked the energy and promoted my father to regent emperor, entrusting most of the state affairs to him. Later, he simply threw the half-national seal to me. I enjoyed discussing matters with him. Talking to someone with a good mind was pleasant. Half a year later, I became pregnant. He cared even less about state affairs, often wherever I was, he was. When I asked, he just said, "Father-in-law is here, rest assured." TSK, I used to call him ambitious. The child was born smoothly, a prince. Justin was very happy, holding the child all day. He wanted to directly make him the crown prince. Naturally, I thought of Arthur, and shook my head. The next year, I wanted to expand the harem. I couldn't be the only one having children for him, right? Justin actually refused. Weak constitution, he said. No, with his vigor even when sick, telling me he's weak? It didn't matter if he disagreed, after all, I still had half the national seal. But then I found out he had taken back the national seal he had thrown to me. In the third year, the child could walk and talk. The palace gradually filled with laughter. I started to drive Justin to the front court. My father was old, how could he handle everything himself? I wanted half the national seal not because I was particularly interested in politics. Once bitten by a snake, 10 years afraid of the well rope. In the fourth year, I got pregnant again. Time seemed to have never passed so quickly. Occasionally, Justin would ask me, "How many more years do I have to live?" See, this person was shrewd. Not asking didn't mean he couldn't figure out my anomalies. Whenever he asked, I would answer, "Just until tomorrow. When you're gone, I'll use your silver to support a whole palace of male concubines. You know, I'm the most unconventional." In the 5th year, our second child was born, a little princess. Justin's face was full of joy, and he suggested making her the crown princess instead of a crown prince. I didn't want to pay him any mind. In the 5th year, Justin was 25 years old. Actually, he had already lived a year longer than in his previous life. I didn't feel any displeasure. Even though, my earliest plan was to keep the son and leave the father. Justin, who didn't need me to personally take action, was simply the most suitable. In the 5th year, Justin took me to see the sunrise. When the rays of dawn broke through the clouds, the entire capital city was peaceful and serene. Going down the mountain, I silently grabbed his sleeve. The times were peaceful. Regardless of length, we seized the day.